So we are now going to get started with the panel session. We have put together an outstanding panel to discuss the topic of how to basically get these big data initiatives right. So we have a very distinguished panel here. So I will start with Andrea first, Function CIO and Data Analytic for Data Analytics IT at Ford Motor Company. So Andrea, welcome. Next, we have Mahesh Rajsekharan, CEO for Clio. Welcome, Mahesh.
Thank you.
Then we have Krishna Kalakuri, founder and CEO for DataFactZ, as well as the CEO for Laven Systems. Welcome. Next, we have Nick Kurchuru, Vice President for Global Big Data Practice at Mastercard. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Brett Vermette, Director for EDW and Big Data Infrastructure and Engineering at GM. Welcome back, Brett. So we have put together a great panel, and before we jump into the discussion itself, I wanted to just basically kick off with few background slides. So we have been hearing from McKinsey Consulting and everybody else about the promise of big data, right? And those of you that were here last year probably saw this slide. So McKinsey basically told us saying, things are going to be different going forward. Big data is going to basically change everything. Is basically what they said, right? So no industry is going to be spared, and every industry will be affected, by the transformation. And then they also basically said, of course, there'll be shortage of talent, and we need over 1.5 million managers that are well versed with these tools and technologies, and so on and so forth. So that was the promise, and that is what McKinsey said back in 2011. Right? And they projected that by 2018, we would basically see, all this need for talent. So fast forward few years, and so they put out another report roughly a year ago, basically saying, you know what? Unfortunately, we are not quite seeing the level of impact that we foresaw. And then they went on to say even companies that are trying hard are not getting this right, for a number of reasons. And they basically said the impact has been really small, right? In the order of 1% of what was projected. But the good news is things seem to be changing rather quickly in the last recent years. And so I ran across this report from New Vantage Partners that just came out a month ago, 2 months ago. And now the industry is finally beginning to report real success with big data. So New Vantage Partners surveyed leaders from 15 Fortune 100 companies, mostly financial firms, as well as healthcare firms, insurance firms, and such. And they basically declared that big data is finally beginning to yield real success. And more importantly, nearly 50% of the firms that were surveyed reported that they are seeing measurable, tangible results from these big data initiatives. And over 80% of the companies are now, in this survey, reporting that they are basically bearing the fruits of these initiatives. But they also concluded that these initiatives aren't cheap. So over 37% of the companies that were surveyed declared that these initiatives are costing in the tune of $100 million, and some 6.5% of the survey participants declared that the initiatives are at the level of $1 billion or so. So with that background, now let's get to basically some discussion. I have put together some material for the panel members, shared the material with them in advance, and we have roughly 45 minutes or so to basically go through some of these questions. So in terms of the panel itself, we have a very good mix of panel members, in the sense we have 3 companies interested in providing solutions and platforms to the industry, and we have here 3 panel members representing what I would call the customers. So we have here GM, we have here Ford, as well as Mastercard. Even though I came to know yesterday that Mastercard is very, very busy providing all kinds of consulting services to companies, across verticals in how to basically leverage this data. And then, of course, we have Clio, HPCC Systems, and DataFactZ wanting to basically provide technology solutions, integration services for this industry. So with that, I will first start with the panel members representing the customers. And so Andrea, I will start with you. What does business analytics mean to Ford, and how are you doing today?
Business analytics, I think we've taken a data and source agnostic approach with a lot of variety. So literally any type of information is an asset to us, right, that can derive value and provide both benefit operationally to the business, but also help us to improve and identify future revenue streams. And so basically it's everything, right? And that's our approach, and that's how we're going after it.
And I guess definitely Ford has taken a very unique approach with the formation of GDIA.
Correct,
and
yep.
trying to basically amass a lot of analytics talent within the company.
Yep.
So happy to hear that. So Brett, what are your thoughts on the current state of practice of business analytics within GM, and how are things going?
I guess the best way I would describe what's going on at GM is it's changing, evolving. We really got big into the practice of the whole business analytics space about 4 or 5 years ago, made a big investment, and we've been learning our way through it. And some of the significant learnings that we've had is that speed is of the utmost. The ability to keep up with the business, keep up with the questions that the business needs to address, and actually be responsive to their needs is absolutely imperative. If you're, we found that if you aren't able to keep up, you dilute your value proposition, and the business moves on, right? The business is moving, and if you can't keep up, you become obsolete. And so the key thing is, it comes back to building the data foundation so that you can get access to the data and get the data in the hands of the people that need it, and empower the business to actually use the data as opposed to putting IT people in the middle of it, et cetera. So, and then the third component is really providing a set of tools that help those people use the data at large scale in a responsive manner, because it's a very discovery-oriented process, and from one day to the next, you may have 5 different questions that yesterday you didn't even think about asking based on the insights that you got. So I think it's just all about velocity, and speed is one of our biggest lessons, and it's evolving, and we're moving in the direction of less rigidity, more agility, and some responsiveness in everything that we do.
So Nick, tell us a little bit about what's happening both internal to Mastercard. Even though you are sort of managing the consulting practice, talk to us a little bit about how Mastercard is managing the wealth of information in-house, as well as how you're trying to help different verticals.
No problem. First of all, I love being here. I grew up in Detroit, 7 Mile Morale, so thank you, Wayne State. Thank you, Dean. This school actually on 2 field trips told me I needed to go to college, by the way, that we came here. So great to be in Detroit. Love it. Grew up here. Thank you very much. And my mom appreciates it too, Dean. So the big thing for us at Mastercard is actually how many people have a Mastercard? All right. How many people don't? The rest of you get the hell out. But we at Mastercard, if you take a look, we don't issue credit cards. We're a technology company. And with that technology, every time you swipe that card, we're collecting data. So internal to Mastercard, what we take a look at is we keep our networks up and running so you can swipe that card and make commerce keep moving, right? But on my side of the house is you take all those transactions and you start to create insights. And we do it at an anonymous level. So we keep security always at the forefront because people have entrusted us with a digital persona. So what we do when we take all those transactions, we start to answer questions. We start to actually solve problems. For governments, how's the economy look for Detroit? Should Detroit make some investments in which neighborhoods? We can help answer those questions by looking where people are spending. We can also help people understand from a business perspective, whether it's Ford, GM, where you should put your dealers. Where you should put your franchisees, where potentially it makes sense to locate things. We call it location services. So we take all that information about when you swipe. And believe me, when you swipe your card, you tell us more than you can ever imagine, because that's you. That's your digital persona. When you actually swipe your cards and spend, you are telling us about yourself in very intimate ways. That's why we do it at an anonymous level, and that's why we're very protective of our data. But again, for us, it's finding those spending patterns and applying it to, where's the professor? To the business problem and the business strategy for our clients and our customers. That's my world. It's an exciting world.
Okay. Yeah, I was chatting with Nick yesterday evening, and I mean, he's really having a lot of fun. He has a great job helping a lot of companies leveraging the data that they are collecting about all of us and how to translate that into actionable information.
Yeah. Data became cool, guys. 20 years ago, it wasn't cool, right?
Because switching gears, now let's basically talk to the other three panel members and get a perspective on, where do you see the technology landscape today and where do you see the technology landscape moving, going forward? So Mahesh, let me start with you. Clio is doing a lot of interesting work in the space of, integration, secure messaging, secure data flows, so on and so forth. Talk to us a little bit about where we are today and where do you see us heading in the next few years?
First of all, it's a real pleasure for me to be here in this conference. I've known Babu for a long time, and third year in a row, it's amazing to see what you have done, Babu, and what Wayne State has done to get this level of academia-industry collaboration. So thank you. At Clio, we are a software company focused on data movement, data acceleration, and integration. And what we're seeing in the big data landscape is there is a tremendous proliferation of tools and a tremendous proliferation of pilot projects. And our role in the ecosystem is to essentially help companies create a rhythm to the chaos, to be able to have a way of getting data safely, securely, at scale, and accelerated into the data lakes. And what we essentially focus on is be able to connect to the various components in the data lake. Could be Cloudera, Mapr, Cassandra, Spark, multiple ecosystem components which are constantly changing. In fact, the new normal is whatever you put in place today is not going to be really functional in a year or two to come from. So our goal is to provide the peace of mind so companies can focus on modeling and analytics and allow us to be the big data gateway so we can safely and securely ingest the data, to be able to aggregate it, cleanse it, provide governance around it, to provide provenance, the chain of custody, and also keep the connecting technology fresh and always on, so the companies can focus on modeling and analytics and essentially operationalize the big data projects. So our goal is to move companies from pilot stage to production stage by taking care of the data ingestion.
And where do you see the landscape today, and where do you see us being in a couple of years, Mahesh?
I would say in couple of years, there's a lot more productionization of big data, right? So today, there are several companies we work with doing pilots and they're getting initiatives. They'll say, well, we got a 30% increase in pricing for a unit for certain products. Or they got a certain operating leverage in certain parts of the business, maybe a 8-10% increase in or reduction in OPEX. But it's not really scaled. I think in the next 2 years, we'll probably move the needle, as the McKinsey Global Institute has talked about. We're going to get much more of the productivity benefits will truly be scaled organization-wide than in certain pockets of the business.
Very good. So Flavia, HPC Systems, one of the oldest big data companies, right? So you guys have developed big data platforms long before, it became popular. And Flavia, by the way, is a trained physician that became a convert into data science. So Flavia, talk to us a little bit about platforms, big data platforms. Where are we today, and where do you see us heading going forward?
A couple things. One is, certainly thank you very much for inviting us again. It seems that we are repeat offenders here, coming every year. But I want to tell a couple things. One is we are a company that is slightly different from the rest of the technology platform providers, because we are our own largest user. We are a big data company, as LexisNexis Solutions, and all of our business pivots in big data. We've been doing big data since the late 90s, when big data wasn't called big data or wasn't as sexy. So we built our own big data platform back in the 90s. And we continue to use that to power our $2 billion plus business. So you can imagine that the platform is quite core to us. Now, the platform is open source now. We give it away. We don't sell it, which is good. And I encourage everyone to use it today. Now, when it comes to data analytics in our own company, and I can tell you that, as I said before, we are a little bit in a bubble because we are a company that does big data for a living, and data analytics particularly, but it does it with its own platform, but not with all of its own tool sets. So there are, I think, two main concepts that come to play nowadays. And those two concepts are integration of tool sets that others have, because many of our data analysts might not want to do these things with our own platform. They might want to use, I don't know, R, or Python. So we need to be able to bring all of those models developed by those analysts and move them into HPCC in a way that is efficient. So we even built a conversion layer that allows you to import a model in, I don't know, CSV format or whatever, coefficients and the type of model, and automatically generate the code generation that will run as efficient as it can in the real-time model evaluation part of things, right, on the model execution. So one concept is integration, and the second one, which is the one that I just alluded to a little bit, is abstraction. And abstraction in the sense of computer science, being able to eliminate all of the underlying details from the end users and just give them information and tools that operate at the user level. So the user doesn't need to know the underlying concepts of how to parallelize a particular model or how to optimize that model for this particular hardware. They can just define which model they want to use and apply it. And in that area too, we have built a number of code generators to allow these developers to work with very high-level concepts to train data analytical models. And that has been extremely successful to us. As a company, if we can reduce the demand that we have for data scientists, not that we don't have demand, we have a very high demand, that makes us far more agile, efficient. Data scientists are expensive. And if you are a student, well, get into data science because it's really paying very well. The dependency on data science, and also reduce the time they go to market with most of our products. Before, we used to take sometimes a couple months in building a single prototype. Nowadays, we can build this on probably 6 or 7 people. Nowadays, we can build one of those prototypes in less than a day with one person. So this lowers the cost to develop these things from a couple $100,000 to $10,000 or less. It's just amazing how much you can gain if you apply abstraction properly. So I'm not just advocating that you should use HPCC, but you should take a look, at least it's free. But that's what worked for us as a big data company. I hope it works for you too.
Very happy to hear that the platform is evolving and you're working to basically improve the efficiencies of these deployments. So Krishna, you've been very successful in trying to transform the company from historically a BI company focusing on business intelligence into a business analytics company. So what are your key observations in terms of how receptive the different companies are in the verticals that you are operating?
Thank you, Babu. Good morning, all. Thank you for being here. So, at least in our experience, being a BI company who evolved into data sciences, what we have seen is most enterprises, they have very successfully built BI platforms, which is helping the businesses understand what happened in the past, right? It is about understanding trends, patterns about your business, but most businesses are today trying to understand what is likely to happen, which is the predictive nature of the business, right? And what should I do for that to happen versus for not that to happen, right? So people are trying to make a shift, or people are trying to make an advancement from your traditional descriptive world to predictive or prescriptive. So that's the general lay of the land that we see in the marketplace. But again, the biggest problem is we see that people are too passionate about technology at the same time. People are adopting technology, at a much rapid pace. They are trying out different technologies in the ecospace, whether be it with big data, you talk about Spark, Cassandra, the ecosystem is fairly large. So in the process, what we are seeing is they are clearly missing the business context, and they are playing with technology, too obsessed with technology, and they're failing too. So what we have also seen is some companies who have been successful in this journey, they always have started with a quantifiable business use case, which means, this use case should demonstrate some business value back to the business. So that is where we are seeing good success, which means now you don't have to necessarily build a data lake on day one. You could start small. You can eventually land all of your data into your data lake as you start growing your practice, but that overall discipline is still missing in the space. That's at least our experience.
So one slide that I jumped through in getting ready for the panel discussion is this observation by New Vantage partners that basically said the single biggest barrier that they're seeing today is culture within companies, in particular what I would call customer companies for big data. So they basically identified a number of factors. They basically said lack of middle management understanding, anxiety within senior management for these tools and technologies. So I wanted to go back to the three panel members. So Brett, I will start with you. Sure. So talk to us about the success you are having within the company, in particular changing the mindset of the middle management and the senior management within GM.
I think it starts with leadership vision and actually really senior leadership support, and that's been our experience. It's interesting how organizational alignment and middle management understanding all sort of take care of themselves when the senior leadership gets aligned on a vision and really starts to understand the value of the potential in the data that you have as part of your company. And it's a sort of an old saying, but really treating data as a valuable asset. And we've all been, in the IT industry talking about that for years and years. But getting the business leadership to really understand and embrace that, I think, really helps to address a lot of resistance, alignment, and so on. And that alignment and that vision from senior leadership, means you have to make an investment. You have to make that upfront investment in the first use case that you think is valuable, or maybe even beyond that to some degree, to start to build the foundation, because there are so many use cases for the use of big data, small data, whatever data you want to talk about, percolating around in the lower levels of the organization, people struggling to solve their problems that they've been tasked with on a day-to-day basis. And so building that foundation to make that easier for them, make the data available, provide them some tool sets that are useful. And I agree, you can't be churning on technology constantly, because that disrupts the business innovation, not by too excessive technical innovation. But I think it's all about alignment at the top and senior leadership demonstrating their vision and demonstrating their commitment through investment, personal engagement, and assigning people to do the work that needs to be done to get the mechanisms in place to take advantage of the opportunities that are there.
Sure, Brett. So Andrea, so a lot of interesting things are happening at Ford.
Yeah.
So where do you see the culture today? Is the organization ready to basically embrace these tools and technologies to empower the the frontline workers?
And then some. So about 2 years ago, and I'll build on what Brett said. So senior leadership, engagement and buy-in is critical. And about 2 years ago, Ford brought in a chief data and analytics officer and created an entire business unit around it, which is, had never been done at Ford in I don't know how many years. And prior to that, the data and analytics was going on, but it was happening more inside of the unique business units, kind of process-oriented silos. So number one, got buy-in right at the top, and what has happened is, so this business unit is aligned on a shared vision of using, and I mention it, but it's literally all the information that they can get their hands on and deriving value out of that. And if there's any obstacle at the moment, I would say is that there's such high demand, and there's, and at some point you're a constrained resource, the data scientists, and even on the IT side, and how quickly we can react. So it's a good problem to have, frankly.
So Nick, talk to us a bit about, so we don't need to talk about what's happening inside Mastercard, because, you're already, focusing and trying to basically assist the companies outside that need help in this space. So what are your observations in engaging companies across different verticals?
The
How
biggest
receptive
thing,
are they in this space?
yeah, the biggest thing is what we've been hearing in the panel this morning is actually taking something the business needs to do. So when you take a look at the last 3 years and why big data hasn't picked up, it's because no one picked a specific problem to solve. They just did something. I was 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a group and I said, so what was your first use case? They said, we did sentiment analysis. We got social media and we got Twitter feeds, Pinterest. I said, great. And what'd you do with it once you were able to figure out the sentiment of your customers? Oh, we just needed to find out if we could do it. I was like, did you tie it to a product? Did you tie it to, opening a market?
Yeah.
No, we can do it now. So senior leadership was like, well, that was a great exercise, but this is really, in my terms from Detroit, this is squat, right? This means nothing to me. So as a result, when we talk to other organizations, the big thing is what does the business, or more or less, what does the organization need to accomplish? If it's cross-sell, upsell where? I start asking like all the questions your 5-year-old asks, right? Why are you doing it? What do you want to get out of it? And you keep asking what? And finally you get to the point of like, okay, this use case now becomes cross-sell, upsell in the Midwest region to be able to sell additional Ford Focuses or GM Terrains. Got to keep them both. That's right. And you start to work on that in X, Y, and Z type of markets, whether it's an urban dealership or we want to catch more of the rural market. Now you've got a use case that's going to get management's attention. And they're going to want to use your services as, if you create a center of excellence around analytics. Again, for us, when we talk about organizational alignment, it's about being able to say, how can I help you, Mr. Customer, or how can I help you, Mr. Business, achieve your KPIs? Because once I achieve your KPIs, I become a valuable asset to you. And unless I tell you how I can achieve your KPIs and help you doing that, I'm actually in that world of resistance. I got enough on my table to work on, right? I got enough honeydews list for my wife that she tries to add more on, but it's like I resist, right? So for us, the big thing is really being able to say, how do we help other people solve their problems? How do we help other people understand that data is actually turned into information? As we heard today, it's now wisdom. I like that. I'm going to tell my mom that I have wisdom now. Not just, she always says you don't have intelligence, but it's a whole other conversation. But the thing for us is just that. Again, tie yourself to a KPI, and the business and the organizations will begin to align with you. Show senior management, we did this. Pick a very specific use case that you're going to solve that helps someone elevate themselves and the organization.
It's interesting too, an old adage, right? But success breeds success.
Yeah.
And as you start to solve one problem, improve one KPI, then you get more investment, and that breeds success. And it kind of grows exponentially on itself if you seed it with the right opportunities from the beginning.
Yeah, who was it?
Yeah, there is another issue that I think we are dancing around, and that is typically the fear from the hippos. Do people in the audience know what hippos are? No, they are not the hippopotamus, the big animal with the big belly. These are the highest paid person's opinion. Unfortunately, many organizations rely on these people, and these people sit in some pockets in the organization that have fear that this will potentially push them out of the organization. When you can take data-driven decisions, why do you need someone that can have a good gut feeling about something and then decide based on an opinion, based on, experience or assumed experience? So certainly it is important to identify when this is a situation in a company, when there is a fear and myths around how much or how little big data will help them, and find use cases that can demonstrate to those people and to their bosses that big data is a valuable asset and that analytics can help you drive effective business. Or organizations that rely on hippos eventually will go extinct.
Just to add to that,
Go ahead, Mahesh.
We talked a lot about the tone at the top, and I can say for us at Clio, as a high-growth software company, one of the most important things we internally found was how do we eat our own dog food, and how do we take these initiatives and build into the operating plan of the business. So for example, if you want to drive certain amount of price increase, let's say 30% year over year, or we have to get the install base to net new business to be 60-40, certain amount of cross-sell, upsell, a certain percentage of increase in lead gen conversion. we build it into our operating plan. So the managers have to execute to it. So that really forces the top down to the department to the individual. And we adopt this Japanese technique called Hoshin, where you take the strategic goals to the mid-level, to the employee level, and tie it, and force the big data initiatives to go all the way down through the metrics. And that just forces adoption. And then you get the results faster, and it goes up the chain.
Excellent, excellent comments. So let me change the topic a bit. A recent trend is, a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, a lot of companies were anxious about, cloud technology, right? Losing control, of their, IT systems and such. So what are your observations? So let me start with you, Krishna. So talk to us about, how receptive is industry for cloud-based services, our, personal clouds, hybrid solutions, things like that. So what are your observations?
So at least what we are beginning to see is a big mind shift in adopting cloud. More and more in the last 12-15 months is what we are beginning to see. But at the same time, being enterprises, you can't take all the applications to the cloud, right? Because being a financial organization, you may have certain regulations or compliances, some governing policies, or if you look at healthcare, they have some restrictions around data not being on the cloud, right? So on one end, when you start migrating some of your applications to cloud, there are certainly a lot more benefits in terms of cost, right? Or looking at the overall operational expenditure or the capital expense, is slightly down. But at the same time, you also need to understand, how do you strike that balance between different applications that are, sitting on cloud versus on-prem. So, but at least we are beginning to see, people are a lot more open-minded in adopting cloud-based solutions these days. But I at least think, personally, most enterprises can't put everything on the cloud for sure. Some of it has to be on-prem. Some, some processes have to be strictly, be done inside their data centers for various reasons. Either it can be security, and we know how security is becoming a major critical factor over the cloud, or whatever the case is, right? So certainly a lot more benefits. We are beginning to see a big shift in people migrating to cloud.
So Brett, do you want to comment a bit on that? I mean, GM, I'm sure, produces a lot of data, consumes a lot of data, and so on and so forth. So what's the strategy in-house?
Yeah, so our strategy is more an on-prem cloud solution. And part of it is, we have the luxury of having the scale to do something like that, not only in the big data space, but to help to support our development community and the things that are going on across the organization, even outside of the big data activity. The data that we're collecting and the volumes of data that are coming from autonomous vehicles, et cetera, almost become prohibitive on a cloud basis, because you're talking hundreds of petabytes of data collected in a very short period of time. So we're moving more and more to an on-prem cloud strategy for our cloud-based solutions, and to try to find technologies that allow us to accommodate our need for the data science community in a very elastic way. So be able to provision and deprovision sandboxes and things very quickly to be responsive to the needs of the business. And those needs change. And we've seen cases where, you spin up a sandbox for a group of data scientists, and then literally a few days later, they're reassigned to a different, more urgent project, and you spin down and reassign that capacity. So I think that flexibility with the cloud-based solution is very important. But our orientation is just to build that internal in our environment, partly because of security and protectiveness of our data as well. But not everybody has the luxury of having the scale and to be able to do something like that. But that's where our strategy is today.
Sure, Brett.
You took the words almost right out of my mouth. So I think the scale. So cloud isn't really a cost play when you have the scale that we have. Mm-hmm. But the technology is obviously very interesting. So we're on-prem cloud. I mean, that's our strategic direction as well, and we're very, very careful and protective of all of our consumer data, and that's part of why we're going down that path.
Sure. And I wanted to ask Andrea and Nick a different question. What is the role of external data in developing all these solutions, analytic solutions? Because a lot of people, Dr. Rana has been talking to us for 5, 6 years, that a lot can be achieved by integrating the data that you have inside. In many legacy companies, quite often we don't have good, rich internal data, and often maybe there is quick return on investment if we can basically leverage some external data. So where do you see the opportunities to basically bring in external data? For example, you have complex supply chains, right? Understanding risk within the supply chains, distribution networks, things like that. So what is the strategy within Ford on how you are leveraging external data to be able to improve your understanding, the 360-degree view of your dealerships or your suppliers and such?
So we have an entire data strategy team that actively looks and pursues, external data sources to bring in, and usually in conjunction or targeted to solve a particular problem or a hypothesis at a higher level scale. So for instance, weather data is very interesting and important, and you can use it to correlate a lot of things inside of a manufacturing or automotive company. So that's just one example.
And Nick, obviously what you're doing is essentially supplying external data to all these companies, right?
Actually, we don't supply external data. We supply the information that we derive from it. We're very protective of the data that we have. We also, when we go out to look for external sources of data or what we want to bring in, we make sure, one, that we go through a whole rigor. One, do we have permission? Does that company have the permission for us to actually use that data? We do not take any PII, personally identifiable information, into our world. We want to make sure of that, and the reason for that is, again, we believe if you hold a Mastercard, you've given us a privilege, and we don't want to have any chance to abuse that privilege or for you to, for us, if God forbid, we get a hack, right? So we don't want to carry that. But when we go to third parties, what we do is we actually look internally first. We catalog what we have, and we've created a catalog, and that's actually what big data does very well, right? We can actually catalog what we have in-house, so then we can understand what to go after and to go get. Most people, when they go get external data, this is from my days at SAS. How many know SAS? I'm a SAS guy. Yeah, but from those days, you go out and say, we just got a whole download of Google data. We've got 1,000 attributes that they're sending us, right? Or from Experian or from Merkle. It's like, well, great, it's 1,000 attributes, but what did you really need? As we found out, you want to know what people are doing on your website, or really the two pieces of information you really need to know is where they came from, what website they came from to your website, and where they go. Google has that information. Those two pieces, just those two, can tell you a whole lot about that particular individual versus all the other data. So if you're going external, you should have a reason, tie it to a business use case, and then you're able to actually say, this is what I need to solve the problem. Otherwise, your data lake turns into a data swamp, right? So again, when you're dealing with external, you want to have a reason, or you're trying to prove out a hypothesis, not just to put a bunch of stuff, like my garage, just a bunch of stuff that you can't sort through, right? So again, when you go external, very important, they're going to give you a view of the market that you may not have, a view of your competitive space, which you don't have. They're going to allow you to understand how to enhance your risk models as you take a look at that. So that's what that's used for, but that's a reason to go get it, not just to go get data.
So Krishna, you wanted to say something?
I'd like to add a very interesting aspect around the external data set here, right? So as Andre said, weather data, there are certainly quite a few external sources that we could really utilize to provide a lot more benefits in terms of insights. But we have actually been doing a very interesting project for a client. So this client is trying to figure out how do they do assortment optimization within the enterprise. How do they stock different items in their stores? And one of their biggest challenges was, how do they, because they're in fast fashion, which means, they have a very quick cycle that they have to go through to really do that assortment plan, right? So when they asked us this question, how can I really understand the customer behavior, right? How do I really understand the customer behavior, not only just, from his transactions, is there anything else we could look at from an insight perspective that gives us a lot more, business benefit, right? So one interesting aspect that we found out is this enterprise, they have certain stores in Miami, in California. Every time when a cruise comes to the port, the sales of these certain stores, they go up by 40, 60%. So this is how you relate that external data effect to the internal data sets, right? But at the same time, just because I have to capture all the external events that are happening all across the country may not seem reasonable, or it could be a very long exercise, right? So this is where you could really make a very good use case, going back to that first question, help the business understand this is the value of adopting external data set, right? And this is how you demonstrate business value and make a big, a lot more a sensible use case to utilize big data, right? Big data can certainly help you with adopting external sources, whether I do a REST call or an API call or whatever the case is. So we are beginning to see a lot more, adoption rate in terms of bringing that external data into the enterprises.
Mahesh.
Yeah, I would quickly add. So the industries we see the most is pharma, retail, and an increasingly supply chain. And for example, in pharma, we involve, just like Nick said, it's not the PII data or the personal data, but how do you have population trends which will aid clinical trials? And so we get involved in having the big data gateway to pull the information. And it's two forms. One is external source data, whether it's pharma data, real estate data. And the other is even internal silos within the organization, which are geo-distributed and internationally distributed. And there are country-specific laws. And how do you move information across boundaries and into the cloud at scale? And that's really aiding the decision-making that you talked about.
Flavio, can you comment a bit on, so we're talking about companies and external data pipelines, and so as a technology solution provider, can you comment a bit on, the open source, trend, and, how companies are more and more receptive to open source platforms, and what the implications are, and where do you see us heading in the next few years?
Well, certainly open source has opened a whole new frontier in big data. Big data would not be where it is today if it wasn't for the Hadoop effort back in 2006. So for many companies. Ours, again, is in a bubble. It's slightly different because it was doing big data before with its own platform. But we made our platform open source after that happened, just because we saw others that were now interested in big data. It's certainly the fact that you have open platforms out there and that you have people that are looking to solve problems and many times don't mind sharing some of that expertise with code, which is essentially what open source is really letting us explore things that we couldn't explore before, and even get ideas. If you cannot just use their code verbatim, you might be able to take some ideas of what they do, how they do it. There are a number of platforms out there that are nowadays quite good for many things. Some of them are more domain specific than others. And I'm not just advocating for HPCC, but I'm thinking of if you want to do deep learning, well, you probably should be looking at TensorFlow. And this is yet another example of a company, Google, that made a piece of software open source for others to use, but also to leverage themselves with all the contributions that they get in a model that is not very different from what HPCC does. I said that we don't sell the platform, and it's true. We don't make money from the platform. We make zero. But we make $2.5 billion from our data business. And that data business gets better every time the platform gets better. And many other users of the open source platform think the same way. So I think open source sits in a nice niche of a nice spot for helping drive innovation into big data pipelines. Data integration, as many mentioned here before, is quite important. Using external data sources and leveraging them. And again, as LexisNexis, 95% of our data, 100% of our data is external data. 95% comes from public sources. These are more than 10,000 different sources. And the rest comes from the customers themselves that are trying to get additional information on that data. So you can see external data is quite important. Of course, more traditional companies will have plenty more internal data than we do for their services or for their use of big data. But you cannot just dismiss a piece of data just because you don't have a way to bring into your system. There are plenty of integration connectors in different platforms. So regardless which platform you are using, you should be looking into these connectors to see how you can leverage that external data. And as I won't repeat this again, but of course you need to have a certain purpose for that use. which justifies the effort to go through that, and of course, ensures that the use is legit, that is allowed by the data that you're using. And in LexisNexis, since the vast majority of our data is personal identifiable data, data governance and data security is a must. So it's not an option.
Sure, Flavio. So changing topics, we are in an academic setting. Talk to us about talent, shortage of talent, how you are dealing with talent growth, talent management within your firm. So Brett, let me start with you.
Well, I think it's interesting, right? Because one of the things that has been a long-standing impediment in our organization and others I've been part of, and I suspect many, is how do you develop the talent internally? And from my point of view, I think you need to have a blended approach where you have to develop talent internally, and I'll say, grow those types of skill sets inside, but also augment it if you want to move at speed, which we talked about earlier, the importance of moving at some level of velocity to keep up with the business. You're finding more and more that you need to bring in some external talent and also have good relationships with schools like Wayne State and so on, so that you develop a pipeline and career path for people from the bottom of their, it's not bottom, but starting of their career till they develop into the, having a blend of that technical data science orientation as well as the business acumen required to really drive good value from the work that they do. So I think it's a blended approach, and I think part of it is having that pipeline with colleges that have progressive programs. We're seeing more and more a demand for that type of skill set, and I know we touched on it earlier, right? It's a good career path to be in if you're interested in earning good money, right? And so, you have to be tapped into that pipeline and as well developing the skills. And, it's interesting because we've seen a momentum building even within the middle tier business. Gartner uses this term citizen data scientist that I kind of like, right? You have the more formal data scientists with the higher end skill sets, but that middle layer within the business is starting to grow at a rate maybe 5 times greater than the top highly skilled folks. And that puts demand back on your data analytics organization, your IT organization, to be able to provide them with the raw material, the data that they require, and the environments and tools to use it. So it's momentum again, back to that culture and momentum thing, where it has an organic growth component to it as well. But I really think it's a blended approach, and from college recruiting all the way to hiring experienced professionals that can help very rapidly infuse and train up your team as well.
Sure, Brett, and we at Wayne State stand ever ready to partner with you. And
I do understand that.
Don't forget about the blue friends in Dearborn, please.
Yes. So Andrea, GDIA has been growing exponentially, in particular since Paul, started heading up the organization. So where do you see talent management challenges?
So, and let me maybe even take a few steps back. So I think, Ford in general is very focused on pipeline at a young age. So, huge outreach efforts of, trying to engage and attract young kids into studying STEM when they go to university. And we have a very robust, college campus university relationship, obviously with Wayne and others, and that we continue to grow. And then, the attract and convincing folks to come to Southeast Michigan. And these are hot commodity talent resources that have a pick of wherever they want to go for the most part. So Ford, we're trying out some new techniques, I would say, and some of them are on the spot, one-day hiring events. So if you make it through the screening, you come in and you can get an offer the same day, because we recognize oftentimes there are folks that have competing multiple offers at play. And then, once you're inside of Ford, there's a lot of movement going around, I would say, between the business groups and between IT and GDIA. A lot of folks going back and forth, which we're perfectly okay with, right? And so there's a core curriculum and skills assessment that's been created around different job families, within data science and then within kind of the IT realm as well. And so we're actively developing folks for this kind of new side of the business that 5 years ago, frankly, we weren't as focused on.
Sure, Andrea. And historically, we knew that there is good talent on the East Coast and the West Coast, and the key is to basically build that talent in the Midwest as well. And I clearly see that changing, and hopefully we'll be contributing to to that through our innovative MS program. So my final question to all of you, there are a few students in the audience. What two suggestions do you have to the students in terms of what do you perceive are the most important skills and technologies that they should develop and be familiar with in trying to, hit the ground running as they come into your companies? So Brett, let me start with you.
I think probably the most important capability is to take your technical skill sets and learn about the business, right? And it takes a little bit of time when you enter into any company to learn about the business. But the most important skill set is to be able to merge those two things and find the right application for the technologies to the right business problems. I think, you can be a fine technician without the business context. It's hard to drive value, and you can have a lot of business problems, but today, more and more in the big data environment, business people need to build a certain amount of technical competency as well to be able to deal with the tool sets required to deal with data at scale. So I really think that number one is find a way to take your technical passion and develop some business acumen, those two skill sets, and then merge them together. And then just follow your passion, follow your, wherever it is that you find interest, because you'll do your best work when you're most invested personally. And finding a business area that you have passion for, finding problems that you have passion for, and then bringing your technical skills that you learn through your education to bear in solving those problems.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to hone in on that. Find an internship or that you can participate in before you get to the end of your studies. I think, if I can speak for myself, you get your first job out of college and you go, wow, that's not like what I learned at university, right? So get some of that hands-on experience so that when you do go take that dream job, you can kind of hit the ground running, start adding value right out of the gate. And, back to what Brett was saying, find the opportunities to take all your technical prowess and then apply it to something that really matters to you, whether it's healthcare, automotive, but apply it to something that you really care about.
Nick?
If I could, hey. I'll get tactical. So if you're going to come in the interview, I'm going to tell you, if you want to go in on a tool, it's a visualization tool. Learn visualization, because that'll help you build a story, because that goes to the next one. I've had the privilege of working for the Walt Disney Company as a cast member, and the one thing they did teach us was how to create a story. But that story comes from a visualization. A lot of those data visualization tools can help you a lot. You may not have to explain to someone about regression analysis or Bayesian principles, econometric time series, but if you have a picture and you can explain it, those are what we're looking for right now. Someone who's got technical acumen can paint in a simple picture. Is anyone from marketing here? Anyone? I'm sorry. But when you can explain to a marketing person something technical through pictures, you're of extreme value. So if you're a student, focus on the visualization tools. Focus on your ability to tell a story, have a conversation, because that's what you're looking to do when you start to partner. So get in there and have some fun with it, and don't wait to have someone tell you, a professor, solve this problem. Go get some information off the net, as we said before, and create your own visualizations. Best interview I've had in the last 6 months, someone came in and said, would you like to see all the traffic patterns in the state of Texas and how they travel? And I was like, did you really? He goes, yeah, well, all those patterns come in. I was like, he goes, let me tell you about it. And basically, all roads lead to Austin, Texas. And that was his story. And he was a computer scientist. I'm like, I love you.
Yes. Mahesh.
Yeah, I would say for students, this is such exciting times, right? Everyone talked about there is more money, there is tremendous career path. The data economy is going to be bigger than the internet economy. To sort of quickly summarize, I would say 4 dimensions is students to focus on. One is the baseline tools and technologies, understand what's current and what's the history of the tools, so you have context. Second, it's about understanding deep modeling and analytical techniques. Third, everyone talked about the importance of the business context, understand business processes, have the skills to be able to define business problems, and so that you can apply the right analytical techniques to solve the problems. And finally, and most importantly, I would say, be great communicators who can articulate the business value, hard business value, from the modeling tools and technologies. The McKinsey article talked about business translators. What a great term, right? They're talking about 2 million to 4 million demand for business translators who can combine data savvy with industry and functional expertise. And that's exciting times.
Sure, Mahesh. Flavio.
Okay, I'll give an answer in 3 parts. The first one is, and this is a rule of thumb, do what you love. Be passionate about what you do, or you will not be any good at any other thing, no matter how much money is paid. So first of all, do what you love and what you have a passion for. Second, if you're looking for hard skills that are quite in demand, statistics, mathematics, programming. Of course, all of the software business acumen are important, but it's hard to get that in university. You get that when you go to a company and start building it. Third, and this is practical advice, come for our internship program. We have a great internship program in HPCC, and we have another one in LexisNexis Resolutions. So join either one of those 2 programs and see for yourself. Just spend 10 weeks with us, and you'll probably get a good experience there.
And Flavio, in terms of industry experience, the MS program that we are rolling out will end with an intense 3-month capstone project that is industry problem based, and so we aim to basically produce graduates that can sort of understand the entire life cycle of developing a highly valued analytics product.
Can we help supply some of our problems to you?
Sure, we will.
That'll be good.
Yes. So finally,
So
Krishna.
completely agree with everybody what described, right? So at least in our experience, what we see is that lack of business exposure, understanding the business context and the business scenario itself is the biggest problem in the space. But more than anything else, what I at least would want the students to learn is to make that adjustment of the mindset, really. So especially if you have to really make that transformation from data science into this world of big data, that mind shift should happen, because a lot of them are great programmers. They can write these great algorithms, right? We have seen instances where people take an R program, put it on a cluster, run it on a single thread. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So you're not really taking advantage of that distributed computing concept itself. So that mindset of not doing things the traditional way, because we all come with a traditional mindset of doing things in a very procedural way, structured fashion. So you have to slightly get out of that mindset, start getting into these new possibilities, apply big data, and also apply the business thought and make it more practical. That's at least my advice.
So thank you all for wonderful input and good discussion today.
Thank you.